Here we are in what is considered one of the most historic and romantic cities in the American South, home to two major battles in two separate wars. Welcome to History on the Spot in Charleston, South Carolina. Just over there, beyond the marshes, once lied the great Confederate stronghold, Fort Wagner. Now, Fort Wagner was made famous during the attack on July 18th, 1863, by the 54th Massachusetts, the 1st Black Infantry Regiment of the Union Army, led by Colonel Robert Gould Shaw. Never captured by the Union in battle, the Confederates later abandoned it in order to consolidate their forces to further defend Charleston. Nothing remains today of Fort Wagner, just one site amongst the marshes. The Battle of Fort Wagner is depicted in the 1989 movie Glory, starring actors such as Matthew Broderick, Cary Elwes, Denzel Washington, and Morgan Freeman. Welcome to Fort Sumter, site of two battles during the American Civil War. The first on April 12, 1861, and the second on September 8, 1863. After the Civil War, the fort was relatively useless to the Union Army, or to the United States Army as it once again became. It was later reactivated in 1898 and armed with new, more modern artillery. In 1947, after World War II was over, it was officially decommissioned, and in 1948, the National Park Service took ownership over Fort Sumter and made it into the historic landmark that we know today. Here we are at the USS Yorktown. Commissioned after the original Yorktown sank at the Battle of Midway in 1942, this aircraft carrier would see much action throughout the latter half of World War II. Recommissioned in 1953, it would see much action throughout the Vietnam War. It would earn itself 11 battle stars and 1 Presidential Unit citation. It would also be responsible for recovering the Apollo 8 capsule and the astronauts involved in the Apollo 8 mission. It would be officially decommissioned in 1970 as one of the most decorated aircraft carriers of our nation's history. Welcome aboard the USS Laffey, a World War II era destroyer. Made famous for her role in Operation Overlord, otherwise known as D-Day, on June 6, 1944, the Laffey would have a long and distinguished career. She was made more famous by an incident that happened about a year later at the Battle of Okinawa. She would come under a blistering attack from conventional bombers and kamikaze fighters. Several of those kamikaze fighters and bombers made direct hits. One of those direct hits would land on the rear turret of the Laffey, giving her the nickname, the ship that would not die. The USS Laffey would be officially decommissioned in 1975. Welcome to the Vietnam War experience. This is a little insight as to what life in Vietnam for the average soldier or Marine would have been like. This recreation includes a guard tower, medical facilities, a landing zone, and Vietnam-era U.S. military equipment and vehicles. During your visit to the Vietnam experience, you get a glimpse of what life was like for the average soldier, sailor, Marine, or even airman. A constant, daily, almost hourly struggle to fight and survive in this chaotic jungle of hell. This is an experience like no other, because not only do you see how our service members were forced to live fighting for their lives, you also gain a newfound respect for them. So please, if you see a service member of any era, of any generation, please remember to thank them for their service, because they've earned our respect for what they've done for our nation and for the world. Welcome to Fort Moultrie in Charleston, South Carolina. This fort has a long and distinguished record of military service, so sit back and let's take it all in. Originally built in 1776, Fort Moultrie would be the opening site of several engagements and attempts by the British military to take this fort in the same year, 1776. Now, they wouldn't actually take Charleston until 1780, by which point colonial troops had to abandon the fort. But 1 year later, the British in 1781 would abandon Charleston after the surrender at Yorktown. Over the next 3 decades, Fort Moultrie would receive multiple upgrades, rebuilds, and refurbishments, adding new artillery and new defensive positions. It would also be renamed from Fort Sullivan, which was its original name, to Fort Moultrie, after its original commander, Colonel William Moultrie. Welcome back to Fort Moultrie. Beginning with the shelling of Fort Sumter in early 1861, kicking off the American Civil War, Fort Moultrie would take its place amongst many of the new defenses that would surround and protect Charleston and its harbor. Now, the Union was never able to take the fort in battle, despite constant attempts and a constant bombardment from the Union fleet. The Confederates, however, would abandon the fort in February of 1865 due to the imminent arrival of General William T. Sherman, who was marching north after his lightning campaign of March to the Sea and destruction of Atlanta and Savannah, Georgia. Welcome back to our final lesson at Fort Moultrie. Starting in 1897, Fort Moultrie would begin undergoing another round of upgrades and being outfitted with more modern armaments, as newer forms of weapons and artillery were produced. One of its ongoing and final acts of service to the United States was as a lookout post, starting in World War I and until the end of World War II, looking for German U-boats patrolling off the eastern seaboard. Fort Moultrie would continually be outfitted with upgrades in its defenses and armaments until it was finally decommissioned in 1947. In 1960, Fort Moultrie's ownership was transferred from the military to the National Park Service, who still own, maintain, and operate it today. Welcome to the Battery, one of the oldest landmarks in modern-day Charleston. The Battery was home to several pieces of artillery during the American Revolution at the Battle of Charleston during 1780. It would continue to see action during the War of 1812, serving as a defensive position. In 1837, the Battery was transformed into the White Points Garden. At the Battle of Fort Sumter, or rather I should say the shelling of Fort Sumter in 1861, the battery once again resumed its purpose as a defensive position. Today, it is once again known as the White Points Garden and the Battery, and it is home to several monuments of American history. Some of these monuments include the sister monument to the 54th Massachusetts Regiment Monument in Boston, the William Moultrie Monument, and a monument to the sinking of the USS Hobson.